Welcome to Get Motivated with Donato Parisi, a show designed to reach you where you are, focusing on the fact that you can be anything you want and desire. All you have to do is get motivated. If you need a challenge in your life, then look no further. Get Motivated with Donato begins now.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to Get Motivated with your Donato, and I'm your host, Donato. How's it going today? Today, we've got a special guest, Dan Gomer. He is a coach, a realtor, an entrepreneur, an author, and so much more. So we're going to get into that today with Dan. Welcome aboard, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And, you know, it was so cool to be in the book with you here, the greatness in you.
Yeah, you too.
You know, and especially to, you know, be mentored by Les and John.
Absolutely.
So with that kind of thing in mind, I'll just ask you an icebreaker question. You know, if you could meet anyone past or present, who would it be and why?
You know, I was just talking with my son yesterday about this. He was talking about how he's in sixth grade and he has a teacher. You know, I'm a former teacher. I get the whole teaching thing, right? And the fact of the matter is, his teacher's a little burned out. I'll give him that, right?
Yeah, right.
And you know, so he complains about that and whatever. And anyway, we started having this conversation about like his responsibility. You know, what if he started showing up differently with her? How might that affect their relationship and how she's showing up with him and all that kind of stuff? And I started telling him the story of Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela is one of those guys that, you know, I just can't imagine being locked up against my will for no reason, really, other than speaking my mind and being the wrong color and getting locked in prison for nearly 30 years. And then coming out and saying, you know what? We need to stop the fighting. We need to do things differently, changing the narrative around that entire situation. And, you know, it's funny. I told this story to my son, you know, I'm kind of going through it in a little more detail with him. And then we sat down for dinner and he was retelling the story to my wife as we're sitting at dinner. It was great to hear him retell it, you know. Anyway, I won't go into details about that. It was kind of funny, but if I could meet anybody, it would be Nelson Mandela. I'd love to just pick his brain and see what he thinks about the current state of things in the world and, you know, how he would react to different things. So, yeah.
Yeah, no. And that's an interesting story too, because like you said, in prison for no reason. And then, you know, kind of, I guess, rose to power in a sense too, right? You know, so went from it's kind of like Joseph in the Bible, right? He was thrown in prison and then became, you know, ruler of Egypt, basically. So it's kind of an interesting thing there. So yeah, no doubt, definitely somebody that would have some wisdom.
Yeah, when you talk to people like that, you know, the cool thing about it is the perspective. The perspective is so obviously different than most people. So just to ask routine questions, I would love to hear what he would have to say about it and just see his perspective on different things, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I always encourage that. I mean, you're a coach just like myself, and I always encourage others, have more than one coach or mentor, you know, get a woman coach and mentor, you know, get somebody of a different ethnicity, because you need that different perspective, right? We need to see things differently. We need to, you know, understand how other people see the world and then start changing our point of view, right? And looking at things in a different manner. That way, you know, we might consider others or other ways of doing things and, you know, have more of an open mind when it comes to some of this. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
All right. So Dan, next question.
Yeah.
The show's called Get Motivated. You know, my tagline here is becoming get up off the couch and get motivated.
Love it.
So from your perspective, as we were just talking about, what does get motivated mean to you?
Well, I love that question because one of the things that I am really hitting hard in the real estate world, I'm teaching a lot in the real estate world right now as I'm trying to grow my team and things like that, is there's so many tools out there. Like, here's how you do an open house. Here's how you know, sphere market. Here's how you do all of these different pieces, right? There's plenty of tools out there for how to build a business. And the same is true in lots of other industries. So the question isn't whether or not people have tools. The question is, are they using the tools? And so that's really where motivation comes in. Why are some people using the tools? Why are other people not using the tools? What does motivation mean? What does it look like? And so it's such an interesting question, and it's something I've thought a lot about. And so your question is, what is motivation, or what motivates people?
Just what does it mean to you? I mean, it's
Yeah.
different perspectives, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So what it means to me is, if somebody is motivated, it means that they are connected to their why. They know what they are doing and they know why they are doing it. They have clarity. And just like with a person buying a house, if they are unclear on, I don't know, if do I want a townhouse? Do I want a house? Do I want a boathouse? They're not going to make a move. When we're unclear, we freeze most of the time. So it's the clarity ultimately around what we want, what we truly want, and why that's important to us that creates the motivation. So I guess if I had to summarize in one word, it would be clarity. Like, motivation is driven by clarity.
Nice. I like that. That does definitely give a good perspective on it.
Yeah. And, and I also believe that motivation can be um, developed. So,
It has to be, yep.
yeah, I mean, I even if you don't want to do something, but you need to, you can find motivation to do it. Even if you're feeling unmotivated in your work right now, you can find motivation in your work. Even if the motivation is just to, go up a step so that you can transfer out of that job and go to a different job, right? Like, it's all about finding that drive within us, and really latching on to something really simplistic, so as opposed to like, oh, well, I want a new car and a new house and a new this and a new that, and I want, all of these things. I want, more time and more freedom and more travel and more da 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 da. Instead of getting caught up in that game, it's like getting down to something really at the core. Like, what do you really want?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that once we tap into what that core is, and it's really simple, then we can say, why am I not motivated? Like, I know that I should be making these phone calls, but I'm not. Like, what the heck is going on? And we can go into the core and be like, oh, well, what I really want to create is a sense of joy. And, these phone calls may not create that sense of joy, but the outcome might. So I'm going to focus on the fact that the outcome of these calls is going to create an experience for me that I actually want. And boom, there's a spark of motivation to go and do something. So I believe that it can be cultivated over time as well.
Nice. No, that's great. And that kind of leads a good segue into your book here, or our book, right?
Yeah.
Greatness in You, and the chapter that you wrote. Let's just find your picture here real quick. There you are.
Look at that handsome devil.
And your title is kind of interesting. You hinted at it just a moment ago. The Most Important Game.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about that title and what that really means.
Yeah. So one of the things that I loved about writing this chapter is this was a concept that I had been mulling around for a really long time. And so it was so nice to just get it out. And so the most important game is getting down once again to that core aspect of what really drives us, what really motivates us, and getting clear on what we want and why we want it. So it's really easy to, and I've gone down this path myself. is it's really easy to get caught up in someone else's game. So the game of maybe financial success, the game of I don't know, goofing off, the game of whatever, right? Like it's really easy to get caught up in a game or a literal game, right? Even basketball, losing ourselves in something that ultimately doesn't really fill our cup.
Mm-hmm.
And so the challenge of this chapter is to think about, well, what is the most important game? What really matters to you? You know, when you're looking back on your life and, you've got nothing left but your thoughts and your memories of what happened, what would you want those memories to look like? What do you wish you would have put more time and energy into, right? That's the most important game. And the other thing that the reason why I wanted to write this chapter is because not only is it easy for us to lose ourselves in the game that somebody else is setting up for us, but it's also easy to forget that we're playing a game. We're playing a game of life. And that might seem kind of silly and whatever, but I really believe that that's what we're doing. We have an opportunity to look at life and take it super seriously. And oh man, like I've got to succeed. I've got to push. I've got to get more. I've got to be more. I got to do more. I got to, be the best dad and be the best this and the everything, right?
Yeah.
And forget about the fact that life can be fun. And we can look at something like a giant mountain that we have to climb, figuratively or literally. There's this giant, unsurmountable thing that we're staring at. And we can look at that and go, time to buckle down and get serious and make it happen. Or we can say, this will be interesting. Oh, let's go. Let's see what's going to happen, right? And approach life with this kind of playful spirit. And so that's why I like using the word game. What's the most important game in your life? You can play being the best dad. You can play being the most successful realtor. You can play being all of these different aspects. But when we come at it from a place of experimentation and playfulness, it opens us up to be able to, it doesn't lock us into one specific thing. It gives us the ability to experiment and experience life on a grander scale.
That's definitely an interesting perspective on all that. I mean, the game of life isn't just a board game, right? And it is all about how we decide to handle things.
Right.
We can choose to go one way or another, kind of like what you're describing, right? Be all serious about it, or we can have fun with it, or anything else in between. And one of the interesting things that you brought up, but you also mentioned in the book, you talked a little bit about how we grow up, in a sense, being programmed, right, to be the best at everything, or do this, or do that. And we get pushed into things. And, I'm sure a lot of it's well-intentioned, right? But all of this pressure is put on us growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I know I have a lot of pressure on me growing up. And then we get programmed with that. And then when we are grown up, we put pressure on ourselves to do all of these things, right?
Yep.
So kind of tell us more about that and what we should do, what we shouldn't do. How can we break up some of that monotony, or just refocus and get these things that we really want in life?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's exactly right. And I see it today, even with my kids. My kids are 12 and 9, and all of their friends and everything. There is a tremendous amount of pressure that's put on them. Now, the kids love playing the games and the sports and all of those kinds of things, right? But at the same time, there is a pressure. There's a pressure to get better, to succeed, to be the starter, and there's pressure on the parents to make sure that they get to play all of the different sports and do all of these different. I mean, there's this, pressure that we put on these kids, and it can be good, right? There's good aspects of it. It's not all bad, right? It teaches them how to be self-sufficient and push through the pain and all those kinds of things, right? But ultimately what ends up happening then is as we get older, um, it can impact the way that we're showing up in our life as adults. And we do start to put pressure on ourselves, at least people who are, trying to continue to like go get it, right? And get after it. And we end up putting a lot of pressure on ourselves. And so what should we do or shouldn't we do? I think it has less to do with what we should or shouldn't do and more to do with what do you want? What do you want? I mean, because the biggest problem that I see, and I'm also a coach and I work with coaching clients and things like that. And when I do, one of the commonalities that I see is they lose sight of themselves. Who are you? What motivates you? Right? I mean, this is a podcast all about motivation. Like, what is going to get you out of bed every day? There's something there. We all have that. We all have something in our core that moves us forward. But what happens is all this stuff just gets stacked up on top of it, and then one day we forget. We forget what we love to do. We lose ourselves. I literally had a conversation with my mom this morning.
Mhm.
I called her up and I'm working on myself, right? Like I'm sure you are and we all
Oh,
should be. And I'm working on my inner child and trying to discover my inner child. I had to call my mom today to ask her what I was like as a kid from her perspective.
yeah.
Because I'm like, I think I remember how I was, but that's my take. That's my perspective. I wonder what her perspective was. And there was a lot of things that aligned, and there was some things that I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Right. So that's an example of how there's aspects of my beingness as a kid that I've covered up, and I'm trying to uncover them so that I can tap back into that again. Right. And I hope I'm not going too far down
No,
uh, a rabbit hole here.
not at all.
um, so as adults, what can we do to kind of tap back into that kind of playful beingness that a lot of us had when we were kids? And I think what it really comes down to is a curiosity. And so going back to treating life like a game, you can only do that if you're curious. Well, what happens if this is an extreme example, quit my job? Not necessarily recommending that, but that's one way you could experiment. What would happen if I went for a drive on a Saturday for 2 hours by myself? What would happen if um, I allowed my kid to miss a basketball practice and took him to the movies? What would happen if, and all of a sudden the curiosity opens us up to a whole world of possibilities. And that is like a childlike nature, a discover. I want to discover, I want to explore, I want to experiment, I want to play. And so if there's somebody who's an adult that is kind of like trying to have a hard time, having a hard time trying to connect with that inner child, just get curious and start playing. Just play with stuff and see what happens.
I like to play.
Me
Now
too.
that sounds funny, but we got a granddaughter, and she's been over, and she's like, "You want to play with me?" And
Right.
so we always we play quite a lot, but and that's fun, right? And it does. I mean, you gotta let some of that stuff go, especially if you got kids or whatever else. I mean, we need to like not be so caught up in our day-to-day lives and everything else that's going on. If you got a child and it comes up to you and they're like just asking you a question or whatever it is, put all your junk aside and look down to them and say, hey, what do you want, or what do you need, or let's play for, you can put some guidelines on it, like I only got 5-10 minutes to play, but take that time out and do it, right?
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and you're going to be rewarded, and I think that's important. I've tried to live that way myself, because it's so easy being a type A personality to be so focused, so strict, so whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be at church, and I would just go into the children's church before it actually got started, just so I could play with all the kids,
Yeah, that's
to
awesome.
get my mind focused a little differently, and things
Yeah.
like that. So
There's magic there, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And going back to that type A personality and stuff, you've kind of hinted at that, and us guys especially, right? We're always so serious, and we tend to block things or not talk about certain things. But in the book, you actually confess, in a sense, or open, maybe is a better way of saying it, that you've struggled with emotions or different things in life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something a typical type A guy talks about, right? So tell us, like, how, especially from a guy's standpoint, why that's so important, how we can open up more, how we can just do all these things that we're talking about, and start to relieve some of these burdens of life.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to come back to the same concept. The short answer is get curious. I mean, like, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, once again, I talked about all these layers that get put up on us. One of my layers was like, you don't cry, right? You're a tough guy. Get man up,
Absolutely.
right? And so that serves us in certain scenarios, and it destroys us in others. And at some point, I went so far down the depression road that I became suicidal in my mid 30s. I had 2 kids, and was just like, what's the point? Why am I doing all of this? This just doesn't make sense. And I talk about that a little bit more in my other book that I wrote, the I'm Full of It and So Are You book,
Right.
the other book that I wrote. But um, I a lot of times what has to happen in our lives for us to change is something has to happen that's excessively traumatic. And then we go, oh, time to wake up. That was kind of my wake up call. I remember when I was 10, 11, my mom took me to a therapist. My parents had divorced, and I was just an angry kid, and I just refused to talk to the guy. And so she stopped sending me to therapy. That was the last therapy session I had been to until I was an adult. And when I hit the point where I was just like, okay, listen, like, you're about to leave a family and 2 kids behind because you can't get over your own stuff. So either do it or stop complaining about it and fix it. And I made a choice that day that I was going to fix it. And that started me down a path of curiosity. Okay, I got a choice. I can bottle it up and be angry and miserable and a terrible influence for my kids, not a good husband for my wife, or I can start playing with something different. What's the worst that could happen? I open up to somebody, I'm vulnerable with somebody, and they throw it back in my face. All right, cool. Maybe that's not a relationship that I need anymore.
Right.
Or, like, we have the choice of how to respond, how to react to anything that happens to us. So, um, you know, coming back to motivation, if we're motivated to change, we will change. And we don't change unless we reflect. And we don't reflect unless we
Mhm.
are vulnerable. So if there's a motivation to change, then I believe there is a requirement to get vulnerable. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't mean everywhere you go, you just cry on everybody's shoulder. It means that you're real.
Right.
We talk about what's really bothering us, what's really hurting, what's our successes. We brag about ourselves when we crush it, and we let people know that we screwed up when we screwed up. That's vulnerability. It's being open. And I think that there's this, I believe it's starting to crumble. But there's this veil on guys for so long that has just been like, no, you don't talk about your feelings, you don't cry, da, 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 da. And now there's a lot more guys who are talking about opening up and being vulnerable and how important it is. And so we're starting to see that kind of wear down a little bit, which I love. Because it is so important for us to be able to open up that way. If we want to be good fathers, good husbands, good, successful entrepreneurs, man, we're not going to get there bottling all this crap up in our brain and in our body. We're going to give ourselves cancer. We're going to die young. We're going to be angry and miserable. Man, what's your motivation?
Yeah.
What's your motivation? Do you want to, do all of those things, or do you want to take a risk, experiment, play, have some fun, get curious? I don't know. What happens if I talk about this subject that's taboo, that nobody's supposed to talk about?
Mm-hmm.
There's only one way to find out.
Yeah.
Got to talk about it.
Well, and I think that's so important. I led a men's group for a long while, and we made it a safe place where, guys, you can talk about whatever you want. We're here for you. We're not going to judge you. We're here to support you. All of these different things. And it was, truly amazing. Like, not only did we have some, good Bible teachings or whatever, but, we were able to come together, right? And be close knit. And like the Bible talks about, iron sharpens iron, right?
Mm-hmm.
And be able to, help support one another and listen and just be real, like you're saying, and that it is so important, because I know even myself, you talk about bottling things up. I did that when I was younger, and it's like, it just, you bring it in, and then eventually you just explode.
Exactly.
Yep. And that's not a healthy way to handle things.
Absolutely.
And then you kind of mentioned something about, like, you cause yourself the cancer or whatever else, be it figuratively or literally. That's how things are. If you keep in hatred and bitterness and resentment and all of this other garbage that we carry around with us, and we just don't let go of it, right? And I mean, forgiveness is a huge part of that too.
Yep.
I mean, if we can just figure out how to be a little bit more real, be a little bit more open, that's not to say, like you mentioned, we don't have to go to every, person out there and cry on their shoulders or nothing. But find that one person, be it a therapist, be it your best friend, or somebody that you can trust, that you can confide in, right? That you can be real with and talk about these things. Because if you can talk about them, you get them off your chest, you can work through them a little bit better, and then it causes you to get motivated, and like you're saying, which way do I want to go?
Right.
What do I want to do? Who do I want to become?
Then you get a choice.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. So that I love. Tell us more. You flashed it up there, your other book. I am full of it, and so are you.
Let's change the world together. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So this book, I originally wanted to title it World Changers. And my wife and some other people said, that's too grandiose. You can't call it that. I'm like, fine. But the concept of the book was, we're all world changers, right? So it doesn't matter how we show up, we are impacting the world. Think of the butterfly effect,
Right.
The way I talk to the barista, the way that I interact with my family, or even just passing somebody on the street. Like, think about that one time when you saw somebody pass you and they were just like, you could tell they were just like super angry or upset. That energy can kind of rub off on you a little bit, right? All of these things that we do, the way that we show up, we change the world. And so if we're going to be world changers, if we're going to impact the world, why not do it with intention? And so the reason that I called it I'm Full of It and So Are You, Let's Change the World Together, is because we're full of everything that we need to lead the life that we want. So if we go back to my story where I was an angry, slighted, victim for a large chunk of my life, and I finally said, enough of that. I'm going to start exploring. Well, when I started exploring, all I was doing was discovering pieces that were already within me. Other people were helping me discover them as I got more curious, but all of those pieces were already there within me to begin with. So we are full of everything that we need to create the life that we want. It's just a matter of tapping into it. And so in the book, I talk about our stories. I talk about my story, your story. Write out your story. It's very therapeutic. It's cathartic to sit there and write out your story. You might start crying. You might, stuff's going to come out.
Right.
It's important. And then taking that story and going inward. It's about seeking to understand ourselves. That's really what it's about. It's about awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So as we become more aware of who we are, we understand our story, we understand why we do the things that we do, we understand the masks that we wear, and we understand all of these things about ourselves. The more we become aware of that, the more control we have over how we show up in our life, which ultimately creates the results that we get. And so, once again, if we're going to be changing the world, why not change it with intention? Why not understand what we really value? Why not understand what's most important to us and understand how we want to show up, how we want to be, how we want to impact the world, and then go out and intentionally impact the world in a way that when we are laying on our deathbed, we can go, yeah, that's right. I left it all on the field and I did it the way that I wanted to. I made some mistakes, but hey, I gave it 100% and I did the best that I could to make the world a better place.
It's good. And I like that one expression. I forget always how to say it, but it's, don't let the grave, rob of all these gifts, these talents and abilities that you have. Get out there and do stuff. If you fail, you fail, but pick yourself back up, do something else again, and I like how, you're just talking about being aware. Earlier you said reflect. I think those are really key important things. And you even mentioned when you were talking about talking with your mother, how you were with the kid or as a child. I think we need to do these types of things as people, like every once in a while, especially where we take notice of how are we acting. You mentioned, like, how do I act towards the barista, right? Our what is our awareness? Reflect back on when we used to be a certain way. Maybe it's our childhood, right? Ask people, and that's the tricky part. If you're asking somebody for how that you are, perceived by them or whatever, you got to be able to take that honest answer, right?
You're gonna get an answer.
But do it so it's creative to yourself. Like, be like, yeah, I probably do come off that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we could do those things and be responsible about them, so we can change ourselves, so we can learn and grow, that's what's important. And I think that's the key of all of those things that you're saying, to make us a better person, right?
Absolutely.
And to help the world around us also, like you mentioned. I like that as well, because I firmly believe that's why we're all here. We all have a story to tell. We all have somebody to reach out to help them with where they're at in life, to get them motivated, to help them heal hurts, and to help them excel in life. So
and how do we do that if we're not clear on, number one, what we really care about and value and where we came from? There's so many easy ways to just cover up our stories or blame, right?
Yeah.
That was the game I played.
Sure.
It was my dad's fault. It was my coach's fault. It was, the system's fault. It was my classmates' fault. It was everybody else's fault. So why did I need to deal with any of that? And what I was doing is I was robbing myself of understanding what the world is all about, what people are all about. I was robbing myself of the ability to connect with other people, because I was not seeking to understand. And once went inward to understand my story, I started to see how my story plays out in other people's story. I started to see how we're so connected. And that's really powerful. I mean, once again, well, I guess I haven't said this, but we can be right or we can be happy. I could continue to be right about my dad and my coach and my this and my and in the meantime, I'm absolutely miserable and I'm dying inside. I think I'll take the first one. I'll get out there and work on myself, seek to understand my story, seek to understand other people, be open, be vulnerable, and get curious about life and figure out how I can do it better, show up the way I want to show up as best as I possibly can. And, nobody can ever take any of that away from me.
Right. No, that's good. So, with all of these things in mind, you're an entrepreneur, you're a realtor, you're a coach, you're a business person. So we're gonna take these, tools that we've learned now and try to apply them, to being that better person, but being more successful in life. You wrote another book that is about realtor or real estate. Is that right?
Yeah. Sphere marketing, how to build relationships is really what it's about, right?
Okay.
To sell more houses, I guess.
So give us some tools that we can use, like more in our business life once we get our act together, right?
Well, I as I'm talking, I'm just seeing kind of the continuity around like everything, right? Once again, it's about there's a certain amount of playfulness when we talk about sphere marketing. So sphere marketing is like marketing to people that we already know. My philosophy in real estate was I can go generate more leads with people that I don't know, but then I don't know who I'm going to be working with. I want to work with people that I like and that are cool and fun to work with. So I'm going to take all of the people that I know, my sphere, and I'm going to expand that out. So that's really what this book is all about. It's how to do that. But really all the strategies and stuff in there are just opportunities to play with something new. Like there's some strategies in here that are going to work really well for you, but not for somebody else. And when it comes to building relationships, number one, if I have a bunch of bottled up anger, guess who I'm going to work with?
Yeah.
If I want to work with cool people, then I've got to let some of that go. I've got to do my work, right? So there is a personal aspect that comes along with building a business like this. There is still that curiosity and that playfulness that needs to happen with like what's working, what's not working, why isn't this working, how can I improve, what's going on, and getting responsible for everything that we're getting in our life, being responsible for that and not putting the blame on anybody else. And also back to the seeking to understand. I built really strong relationships with people because I got to know them. And if you're in sales, if you're an entrepreneur, you're in sales.
Right.
It's about building relationships, and the best way to build relationships. Well, there's really two main things. The best two ways that I can find to build relationships is number one, seek to understand, in no particular order, seek to understand the other person, right? And number two, seek to understand ourselves. Because the more we understand ourselves, the more we're going to understand other people, and the more we're going to be able to connect with other people. And the more we connect with other people, the more that they're going to want to work with us, and the more that they're going to want to refer us out. And that's the foundation then for building a really successful business, at least in real estate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's very relationship based.
Well, that's just how things used to be, especially more old fashioned, right? You build up those relationships. You always go to that one mechanic or that one barber or whatever, because you establish that rapport, you build that relationship, you get that closeness, and you just don't do anything with anyone else, right?
Right.
Because it's all about relationships. And you mentioned going to work with anger or something like that. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he was, I don't know, dealing with something business-wise on the phone, and that person was like just being all mean and rude and whatever else, and he's like, I just don't get it. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. I guess the guy, somebody kicked his cat, that old expression. Right. and it's like, yeah, I guess so is what he said. And like, yeah, you just can't let it get to you. Yep. It's so easy to snap back and to act that same way, right?
Right.
And have that tendency, when you're treated that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you can, go ahead.
Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. When I run into somebody like that, and trust me, this takes a lot of practice, and I am by no means perfect at it. When I run into somebody that is grumpy, we'll just say, right? The question that I start to ask is, okay, if I was that person, why would I act that way? And what that does is it builds empathy, and it allows us to connect with that person. We may never understand exactly what's going on, and they may still be a jerk forever and ever and ever. It's not about changing them. It's about changing our relationship with them, right? Internally. And so once again, by understanding who we are and where we come from and why we do the things that we do, we understand other people and where they come from and why they do the things that they do. And the more that we can understand that, the more that we can connect with people. And the more we connect with people, the more sales that we get. That's true for most businesses, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So when my son complaining about his teacher, I was telling him the other day, I'm like, hey, you don't know what's going on with her. Is she going through a divorce? Well, I don't know. Okay. Is she, having financial troubles? I don't know. Is she physically feeling ill? Maybe. I don't know. Like, then stop judging her, right?
Yeah.
Show up differently and see what happens, right? And so it's about taking that responsibility, seeking to understand where they're coming from. And once again, it may not change anything. She may still be a jerk tomorrow. Who knows? But at least he's trying, and at least he has control over that,
Yeah, we don't have to make it part of who we are, right? So
right.
That old expression, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. There's another one that I heard something though, and it's kind of like, well, I think I heard it a couple of different ways, but one of them would be like, wearing a backpack and it's empty, right? And you're just letting people put stuff in your backpack, and it's just weighing you down over time. And if you keep that backpack zipped up, nobody can put that stuff on you, right? Mm-hmm. You're the one that's allowing it to come in. So we gotta probably do a little bit better of a job about just letting that stuff roll off of us and not impact us, right? And then maybe, just maybe, if we're positive, if we've got the joy and the happiness you were talking about and everything else, maybe that will rub off on them and give them something that will help brighten their day,
right.
Get them out of the rut that they're in.
Well, I mean, have you ever called into, everybody talks about calling into the call center and you get the person that's like a total jerk on the other end of the phone, and how do you deal with them? But have you ever called into a call center and had that person that's like, hello, this is Mary, how can I help you? And you're
and you're like, sweet.
Oh, right on. Okay, cool. I was like all prepared for a fight. All right, cool.
Right.
This is going to be great. Right. It's, people talk about energy being woo woo, right? And up in the clouds and all that kind of stuff. But we do not have to be anywhere near each other. We don't even have to necessarily say anything to be able to affect other people's energy. And especially when we've practiced and we have a powerful presence of like confidence and positivity and a problem solver kind of mentality. When we just naturally show up that way, people can feel it, and it has an impact, but once
Yeah.
again, we don't get there without intentionally practicing something and getting better and growing.
Yep. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So is there anything else before we close out today that you want to share as far as your backstory goes, or your how people find you, all of those different kinds of things?
Yeah, so there's lots of different places to find me. I've got a YouTube channel. It's Dan Gomer Speaks. You can find me on Facebook, dangomer.com, danshometeam.com. So dangomer.com is my more like coaching side of things. Dan's home team is more my real estate side of things. And, I am looking to continue to grow my team. I know you guys are in Minnesota. I'm in Denver. But one of the cool things about the company that I'm with is I can actually bring people on my team from all across the nation. In fact, all from around the world. And, one thing that makes me so passionate about what I'm doing is like, I like selling houses. It's great. Right. What I'm really passionate about is helping other people develop, helping other people grow their businesses, grow personally, and really, having my impact, right. Making the world a better place in my own unique way. And I can do that through a team of real estate agents. It's a fantastic platform to do that. So, if anyone out there is looking for a little more support, looking for a new team to join that is going to support their goals, like I'd love to talk to you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to share with us? Any people out there that you want to have people take action?
When we talk about motivation, I guess I would leave it with this. We all have ideas. We all have things that we want to do. We all have aspirations, right? There's things that we want to do. Some of us sweep them under the rug. Some of us go get them right away, whatever. But if there's somebody out there watching this who is like, I have an aspiration to do something and I'm having trouble finding the motivation to do it, I'm all about keeping it as simple as possible. And the question is, what do you really want? And why is that important to you? So, I want $1 million. Maybe, but I think what you really want is what $1 million represents. So what's underneath $1 million? Why is $1 million important? Well, because it means more security. Why do you need more security? Because it means da-da-da. Why does it mean that? And you keep asking why until you get down to something really simple, right? Really simple at the core. So that would be my one piece of advice. If you're looking for motivation, go inward. Why haven't you created it yet? What's holding you back? And you figure that out by asking, what do you really want? Because maybe the thing that you say you want is actually not what you want. Maybe you can go get something that's much more fulfilling, but gives you that sense of satisfaction. And all of a sudden you're totally motivated to go do that. But you can't figure that out until you start playing in your own mind.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Especially your analogy. Who doesn't want $1 million? But
right.
It's like, what's that going to give me? Is it going to give me financial stability? Is it, going to give me a new house? Is it going to get me out of debt? Find those areas like you're talking about that you can hone in on, and then just start working from the ground up, right?
Yep.
Just knock them out little bit by little bit, and then now you've got a goal, right? You've got something to work towards and achieve.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awesome, man. I appreciate that and your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
this was excellent. I mean, you gave us a lot of different perspectives and things to think about that I think are, huge and important. So I appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on today. And to everyone else out there, be blessed.
Follow Donato on Facebook and LinkedIn at Donato Parisi, or go to donatomotivates.com. Remember, you can be anything you want and desire. All you have to do is get motivated.